The 15th floor of Gangnam's most exclusive apartment complex was where Seoul's elite lived in carefully curated silence. Here, success was measured in square footage and the coldness of one's demeanor. And no one embodied that coldness better than Kang Ji-hoon. At 32, he'd built an architectural empire on the foundation of fear and precision. People didn't just respect him, they avoided him, which was exactly how he preferred it. The elevator doors slid open with a whisper, revealing Ji-hoon in his signature dark Armani suit, phone pressed to his ear, eyes like winter steel. 3 residents already inside immediately fell silent, pressing themselves against the walls as if his presence alone could freeze them solid. He stepped in without acknowledging their existence, his voice cutting through the silence with clipped instructions to someone on the other end about structural modifications that would cost someone their job if not corrected by morning. The elevator stopped. On the 12th floor, the doors opened to reveal a woman in a bright yellow dress that seemed to carry its own sunlight. She had rich brown skin that glowed against the fabric, her natural hair styled in an elegant twist, and she moved with the kind of unhurried confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are. Zara Okoro stepped into the elevator, her arms full of grocery bags that smelled like spices and something warm, something that had no business existing in this sterile building. She glanced at the button panel, saw her floor already selected, and settled into her spot directly beside Ji-hoon. Not across from him, not in the corner, beside him. As the doors closed, Ji-hoon shifted his weight, deliberately bumping her shoulder with his own. It was a calculated move, one he'd perfected over the years. People either apologized profusely or got confrontational, both reactions feeding his control. Zara did neither. She simply adjusted her bags, her expression unchanged, as if she'd been bumped by a breeze rather than Seoul's most feared CEO. She didn't even look at him. Something flickered in Ji-hoon's chest. Confusion, maybe, or curiosity. He wasn't sure which, and that uncertainty unsettled him more than he cared to admit. The elevator continued its ascent in silence, but for the first time in years, Ji-hoon found himself paying attention to another person's breathing, the soft sound somehow louder than his own thoughts. 2 weeks passed before Ji-hoon saw her again, though he'd found himself wondering about the woman in yellow more often than he'd admit. His mornings began at 5:30 in the building's private gym, a sanctuary of controlled exertion where he pushed his body with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to everything else. The space was always empty at this hour, the silence broken only by the measured rhythm of his breathing and the mechanical hum of equipment. Until today, Afrobeats poured from a phone speaker, the rhythm infectious, and entirely too loud for 5:30 in the morning. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened as he turned to identify the source of this disruption. There she was, the woman from the elevator, moving through a workout routine that looked nothing like the regimented exercises he preferred. She danced as much as she trained, her body flowing with the music, joy radiating from every movement. When she caught his stare, she offered a polite smile, turned her music down by exactly 1 notch, and continued as if his disapproval was nothing more than weather she couldn't control. Ji-hoon increased the intensity of his workout, his movements sharp and aggressive, hoping the display of raw power would communicate what his glare apparently hadn't. She remained utterly unbothered, singing softly to herself in a language he didn't recognize, her contentment impenetrable. Over the next several days, Ji-hoon found himself in the mailroom when she collected her packages, in the parking garage when she loaded groceries into her modest car, on the rooftop garden when she tended to the small herb boxes some residents maintained. Each time, he deployed his full arsenal of intimidation. The cold stare that made junior architects tremble, the deliberate invasion of personal space, the way he could make his presence feel like a threat without saying a single word. And each time, Zara Okoro responded with the same polite indifference, as if he were simply another neighbor rather than a force of nature to be feared. His secretary, Minji, noticed the change during a morning briefing. Ji-hoon had checked his phone 3 times in 10 minutes, something he never did during meetings. He'd also smiled, barely, when she mentioned the building management newsletter. Minji had worked for him for 5 years and could count on one hand the number of times she'd seen him smile. Something was different, someone was different, and whoever she was getting under the Ice Prince's carefully constructed armor. Late one evening, Ji-hoon returned to his penthouse exhausted from a site inspection that had revealed multiple contractor failures. He was moving through his nightly routine, the silence of his apartment as familiar as his own heartbeat, when he heard it. Laughter. Rich, unrestrained, genuine laughter coming from the apartment next door. He'd never paid attention to his neighbors before, never cared who lived in the surrounding units. But this laughter stopped him mid-step, pulled him toward the shared wall as if magnetized. "A beg, this man think say he be Ice Prince or what?" The voice was Zara's, speaking in pidgin English, her tone warm with amusement rather than malice. "Every morning he day look me like say I commit crime, as if person no fit enjoy herself for gym. The man just needs somebody to thaw that frozen heart, I swear." She laughed again, the sound accompanied by other voices, friends joining her mockery with affection rather than cruelty. Jihoon pressed his palm against the wall, something cracking inside his chest. When was the last time someone had laughed about him rather than in fear of him? When was the last time he'd been seen as human enough to be teased? The realization hit him with unexpected force. He was lonely, desperately, achingly lonely, and this woman, this stranger who refused to be intimidated, had somehow exposed a truth he'd been hiding from himself for years. He wanted her to see him. Not his reputation, not his success, not the carefully maintained Ice Prince persona that kept the world at arm's length. He wanted Zara Okoro to see Kang Ji-hoon, the man beneath the armor, and he had absolutely no idea how to make that happen. The storm arrived 3 days later with the kind of violence that makes meteorologists sound apocalyptic. Rain hammered the building, the wind screaming between the towers of Gangnam's skyline. By midnight, water had breached the underground parking structure, flooding the lower floors with shocking speed. Emergency alarms pulled residents from sleep, herding them toward the upper floor common areas in various states of panic and undress. Jihoon emerged from his penthouse to controlled chaos. Water was rising in the stairwells, the elevators shut down for safety. He was about to retreat back to his apartment when he saw her. Zara, already dressed despite the late hour, was helping Mrs. Park, an elderly woman from the 8th floor, navigate the crowded hallway. The old woman was disoriented and frightened, but Zara spoke to her in soft, soothing tones, one arm supporting her weight, while the other carried a small dog that definitely belonged to someone else. "Mrs. Park needs to get to the 20th floor." Zara called out to no one in particular, her voice cutting through the chaos with natural authority. "Her daughter lives there. Can someone help me get her upstairs?" Jihoon moved before he could think about it, before he could calculate the strategic value of the gesture. He simply moved, taking Mrs. Park's other arm and meeting Zara's eyes for the first time with something other than cold assessment. Up close, her eyes were even more striking, warm and intelligent, and entirely unimpressed by his sudden assistance. "Follow me," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I know a service elevator that's on a different system." They moved through the building together, Jihoon leading the way while Zara kept Mrs. Park calm with a steady stream of conversation in surprisingly fluent Korean. When they finally delivered the elderly woman to her grateful daughter, Zara turned to Jihoon with genuine appreciation in her expression. "Thank you. That was kind of you." Kind. When was the last time anyone had called him kind? The word sat strangely in his chest, unfamiliar and uncomfortable and somehow precious. By morning, the storm had passed but left destruction in its wake. Zara's apartment on the 12th floor had taken significant water damage. The ceiling collapsed in her bedroom, her belongings soaked and ruined. Jihoon found her in the hallway outside her apartment, on the phone with her insurance company, her earlier confidence replaced by tired frustration. She'd been awake all night helping other residents, and now faced the reality of being temporarily homeless. "I can stay with a colleague in Itaewon," she was saying to someone. "It's just far from work, but I'll manage." Jihoon heard himself speak before his brain could veto the impulse. "Stay in my spare room." Zara turned, surprise clear on her face. Around them, other residents who'd gathered to assess damage fell silent, shocked by the offer. Kang Jihoon didn't make offers. He made demands and issued ultimatums. "Your apartment is being repaired," he continued, his voice returning to its usual controlled tone, as if this were a logical business proposition rather than something unprecedented. "My penthouse has a guest suite." "It's practical." Zara studied him. For a long moment, those intelligent eyes searching for the angle, the hidden cost. But Jihoon kept his expression neutral, giving her nothing but the simple truth of the offer. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, thank you." I'll try not to disturb your perfectly organized life too much." There was humor in her voice, gentle teasing that acknowledged his reputation without apologizing for her acceptance. As Jihoon helped her carry what could be salvaged to the penthouse, he realized his perfectly organized life was about to become very disturbed indeed. That first evening, Zara stood in Jihoon's kitchen and laughed. It was a space designed by an award-winning minimalist, all clean lines and hidden storage, a kitchen that looked like it had never been used because it rarely had. Jihoon ate most meals at his desk or in carefully selected restaurants. The kitchen was a showpiece, not a workspace. "You have a $50,000 stove and no cooking oil," Zara said, shaking her head as she examined his nearly empty refrigerator. "This is a crime, a culinary crime." "I don't cook," Jihoon replied, standing awkwardly in the doorway of his own kitchen, suddenly aware of how sterile his life had become. "Well, I do. And if I'm staying here, we're eating real food, none of this protein shake nonsense." She pulled groceries from the bags she'd insisted on stopping for on the way up. "Tonight you're having jollof rice. Nigerian style, which means the best style, and I won't hear arguments about Ghanaian versions being better." Jihoon found himself almost smiling at her certainty. "I wasn't aware there was a competition." "Oh, there's definitely a competition. West Africa takes rice very seriously." She began moving through his kitchen with the confidence of someone who could make herself at home anywhere, pulling out pots and pans that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Sit, watch, learn. You might be the ice prince out there, but in here, I'm in charge." So Jihoon sat at his own kitchen island and watched Zara Okoro cook. She moved with unself-conscious grace, talking as she worked, explaining the importance of frying the rice and tomato paste first, the specific blend of spices that made jollof distinctive. The way her grandmother had taught her to taste and adjust, rather than follow recipes blindly. The apartment filled with scents Jihoon had never associated with home, warm and rich and alive. When she finally placed a plate in front of him, the rice, a deep red-orange, perfectly seasoned and topped with tender chicken, Jihoon took a bite and experienced something he'd forgotten existed. Comfort. The food was delicious, yes, but more than that, it was made with care, served with warmth, meant to nourish rather than simply fuel. "Good?" Zara asked, watching his reaction with barely concealed amusement. "It's good," he admitted, and then, because something about the moment demanded honesty, he added, "I can't remember the last time someone cooked for me." Zara's expression softened. She served herself and sat across from him, the kitchen island suddenly feeling less like a design element and more like a table meant for sharing meals. "Tell me something true, Kang Jihoon. Why does someone who clearly has everything act like he has nothing to lose?" The question landed with unexpected weight. Jihoon set down his fork, considering his usual deflections, his practiced ways of ending conversations that ventured too close to anything real. But Zara waited with patient curiosity, and somehow, in his own kitchen filled with the smell of her cooking, the walls felt thinner than usual. "Because having everything means disappointing everyone when you lose it," he said finally. "It's easier to be cold. People fear cold. They respect it. They don't ask it to be anything more than what it is. That sounds lonely." It is. The admission surprised him as much as it clearly surprised her. But lonely is safe. Zara reached across the island and, with no hesitation at all, placed her hand over his. Her skin was warm, her touch gentle, and Jihoon couldn't remember the last time someone had touched him with simple human kindness rather than professional necessity or calculated seduction. "Lonely is not safe," she said softly. "Lonely is just slow dying. You're too young to be dying, Kang Jihoon." They finished their meal in comfortable silence, but something had shifted. Some barrier crossed that neither of them acknowledged but both clearly felt. Over the following days, Zara's presence transformed the penthouse. She brought plants, explaining that no space should be without living things. She played music in the mornings, Afro beats and Nigerian pop that made the sterile apartment feel inhabited rather than displayed. She left books on the coffee table, her reading glasses perched on top, creating small evidences of life that Jihoon found himself not wanting to organize away. She worked from his dining table during the day, her job as a cultural consultant, involving endless video calls with companies trying to navigate international markets. Jihoon would overhear her switching seamlessly between English, Korean, and what he now recognized as Igbo, her expertise undeniable, her passion for building cultural bridges evident in every conversation. At night, she cooked. Not always Nigerian food, but always something made with care, always insisting he sit and eat with her rather than taking a plate to his office. They talked during these meals, carefully at first, then with increasing ease. She told him about growing up in Lagos, her family's expectations that she become a doctor, her rebellious choice to study anthropology instead. He told her about the weight of being the eldest son, the way his father's approval had always felt conditional on perfection, the gradual realization that he'd built his entire identity around being untouchable. You know what's funny? Zara said one evening, looking at him over plates of pepper soup she'd made, that had Jihoon's sinuses clearing and his eyes watering in the best possible way. You try so hard to be cold, but you're actually quite warm when you forget to maintain the ice. I don't forget, Jihoon protested, but his tone lacked conviction. You do. Just now, you laughed at my story about my brother's terrible attempt to impress a girl. You didn't calculate whether laughing was strategically appropriate. You just laughed. It was nice. You should do it more often. Jihoon found he had no response to that, so he took another spoonful of soup and let the burn distract from the warmth spreading in his chest. One night, Jihoon worked until 3 in the morning, pushing through a proposal that required his complete focus. When he finally emerged from his office, exhausted and knowing he'd pay for it tomorrow, he found a note on his desk in Zara's handwriting. Your brain is impressive, but your body needs rest too. Sleep well, Ice Prince. You've earned it. He held the note for longer than made sense, studying her handwriting, the casual affection in her words. No one worried about whether he rested. No one thought about what he'd earned beyond his next success. When he finally crawled into bed, the note was still on his nightstand, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Kang Jihoon fell asleep, feeling something dangerously close to happiness. The building management called after 2 weeks. Zara's apartment was repaired, ready for her to move back in. She received the news while Jihoon was reviewing contracts in his office, and when she told him that evening over dinner, the silence that followed felt heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. That's good news, Jihoon finally managed, his voice carefully neutral. You can return to your own space. Yes, Zara agreed, but she didn't sound particularly enthusiastic. It'll be nice to have my things around me again. They finished the meal in uncharacteristic quiet, both suddenly very interested in their food. After, as Zara began gathering her belongings that had spread throughout the penthouse over 2 weeks, Jihoon found himself in his living room, staring at the plants she'd brought, the cookbook left open on the counter, the throw blanket she preferred draped over his minimalist couch. Without her things, the space would return to its former sterile perfection. The thought made him feel hollow. He found her in the guest room, folding clothes into a borrowed suitcase. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway, and something in his expression made her stop what she was doing. I don't want you to go, Jihoon said, the words coming out more raw than he'd intended. I know that's not practical or logical, and I know you need your own space, but these 2 weeks have been. He struggled for words, his usual articulate precision failing him. You made me remember what it feels like to be warm. Zara's eyes softened, and she crossed the room to stand in front of him, close enough that he could smell the coconut oil she used in her hair. I don't want to go either, she admitted. But Jihoon, you know this was always temporary. I live next door. It's not like I'm disappearing. It won't be the same. No, she agreed. It won't, but maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we should figure out what this is when we're not playing house in a crisis. She was right, of course. She was usually right, but that didn't make watching her leave the next morning any easier. The penthouse felt cavernous in her absence, every carefully designed space suddenly revealing itself as empty rather than minimalist. Jihoon tried to return to his old routines, but they no longer fit quite right, like a coat he'd outgrown without noticing. 3 days passed before Jihoon knocked on Zara's door. He'd spent those days trying to convince himself that what he felt was simply the result of proximity, that the feeling would fade with distance. Instead, it had intensified, the wanting sharpened by absence. When she opened the door, surprise and pleasure crossed her face in quick succession. Ice Prince makes house calls now? I brought something. He held up a bag from her favorite Nigerian grocery store in Itaewon, the one she'd mentioned during one of their late-night conversations. You said they have the plantains your grandmother preferred. Zara's smile was worth the 2-hour round trip he'd made to get them. You remembered that? I remember everything you tell me. The confession came easier than expected. May I come in? Her apartment was smaller than his penthouse, but it felt more like a home in the first week than his had felt in 5 years of ownership. Colorful fabrics draped over furniture, photographs of family and friends covered one wall, books and art supplies created comfortable clutter that spoke of actual living rather than magazine-ready display. This was Zara's space, unapologetically personal and thoroughly warm. She made him tea, Nigerian style with milk and sugar and spices he couldn't identify, and they sat on her couch that was significantly less expensive than his, but infinitely more comfortable. So, Zara said, studying him with those two knowing eyes, you going to tell me what you're really doing here, or we going to pretend this is just a neighborly plantain delivery? Jihoon set down his tea, gathering courage he usually reserved for billion-dollar negotiations. I'd like to take you to dinner, not as neighbors, not as friends, as something more deliberate than that. You're asking me on a date? I'm asking if you'd let me try to be warm enough to deserve your company. Zara laughed, the sound filling her small apartment with joy. Kang Jihoon, you don't have to deserve anything, but yes, I'll go to dinner with you, on one condition, which is, you tell me one more true thing. Right now, Jihoon met her gaze, saw the challenge and invitation in equal measure. I haven't stopped thinking about you since the first moment you didn't apologize in that elevator. You looked at me like I was just a person, not a reputation or a weapon, and I've been trying to figure out how to be that person ever since. Good, Zara said softly, because that's the person I'm interested in getting to know better, not the Ice Prince, just Jihoon. Their first official date was at a small Korean restaurant Jihoon had never been to, deliberately chosen because it was the opposite of the high-end establishments where he was inevitably recognized and treated like visiting royalty. Here, the owner was a grandmother who scolded him for being too thin and heaped their table with more banchan than 2 people could possibly eat. Zara charmed the elderly woman with her Korean, which had improved noticeably, and taught Jihoon how to properly enjoy a meal without checking his phone every 5 minutes. You're bad at this, Zara observed, amused, when he reached for his phone for the 3rd time. Bad at what? At being off duty. At just existing without purpose or productivity. When was the last time you did something just because it felt good? Jihoon considered the question seriously. I'm not sure I ever have. Everything serves a purpose. Even leisure is strategic recovery for better performance. That's the saddest thing I've heard all week. Zara reached across the table and took his hand, her thumb brushing across his knuckles. Let me teach you something. Close your eyes, Zara. Just do it. Trust me. Jihoon closed his eyes, hyper-aware of every sound in the restaurant, the feeling of her hand in his, the vulnerability of sitting in public with his eyes closed like a child. Now, just be here, Zara instructed, her voice soft. Feel the warmth from the food. Hear the grandmother laughing in the kitchen. Feel my hand holding yours. Don't analyze. Don't optimize it. Just feel it. This moment, right now, has no purpose except to be experienced. Jihoon sat there, eyes closed, hand held, and tried to simply exist. It was harder than any business negotiation, more challenging than any architectural problem. But slowly, incrementally, he felt something shift. The tension in his shoulders eased, his breathing deepened, and for just a moment, Kang Jihoon existed without purpose, without strategy, without the weight of reputation. He was just a man holding hands with a woman who made him want to remember how to be human. When he opened his eyes, Zara was watching him with such tender understanding that his breath caught. See? She said. The world didn't end. You're still here, and so am I. After that night, something changed between them. Not dramatically, not with grand declarations, but with a quiet settling into possibility. Jihoon found himself at Zara's apartment more often than his own, helping her cook dinner while she taught him the specific ways to cut vegetables for different dishes. She came to his office sometimes, bringing lunch and sitting in his minimalist space with such natural ease that even his secretary stopped being shocked by her presence. They attended one of Zara's seminars together, a workshop on cultural integration strategies for Korean companies expanding into African markets. Jihoon sat in the back, anonymous in the crowd, and watched Zara command the room with expertise and passion. She was brilliant, her insights sharp, her ability to bridge cultural divides evident in every word. When someone asked a question with barely concealed skepticism about African markets being worth Korean investment, Zara's response was both educational and pointed, dismantling assumptions with grace and data in equal measure. Afterward, as they walked through the Seoul evening, Ji-hoon said, "You were extraordinary today." "Today?" Zara teased. "Just today?" "Every day, but especially today. The way you handled that dismissive question about market viability, you could have embarrassed him. Instead, you educated the entire room. That's the job. Building bridges means sometimes swallowing your first response and choosing the one that actually moves people forward." She looked up at him, something serious entering her expression. "Kind of like what you're doing. Learning to be warm instead of cold, even though cold probably feels safer." "You're changing me," Ji-hoon said, and it wasn't an accusation, just an observation tinged with wonder. "No, I'm just reminding you who you were before you decided that cold was the same as strong." On weekends, they started Korean lessons together, though they'd morphed into something more like cultural exchange sessions. Zara would teach him Igbo phrases, laughing when his tonal pronunciation went wildly wrong, while Ji-hoon patiently explained the nuances of Korean honorifics and the different social registers required for different situations. These sessions always devolved into something more intimate, conversations ranging from childhood memories to philosophical debates about home and belonging and what it means to build a life between worlds. The changes in Ji-hoon didn't go unnoticed. His staff began cautiously mentioning the shift in office culture. He no longer ruled through fear, though his standards remained exacting. He smiled more, asked about people's families, remembered birthdays. The Ice Prince was thawing, and while some of his older employees seemed unsettled by the change, most responded with visible relief and increased loyalty. Turns out people work harder for leaders they admire than for those they fear. Minji, his secretary, finally gathered the courage to comment. "Whatever's happening, sir, it's good. You seem happy. I don't think I've ever seen you happy before." Ji-hoon considered denying it, maintaining professional distance, but found he didn't want to. "I am happy. Minji, for the first time in a very long time, I'm actually happy." 3 months into their relationship, everything shattered in the span of a single afternoon. Ji-hoon returned to his penthouse to find his mother sitting in his living room, her presence announced by the building's concierge, who'd been unable to refuse a Kang family matriarch. She sat like visiting royalty, her designer hanbok immaculate, her expression radiating controlled displeasure. "Mother, you should have called ahead. I wanted to see where my son was spending his time. The rumors about your behavior have been concerning." Her eyes swept the apartment, landing on small evidences of Zara's presence. The Nigerian cookbook on the counter, the throw blanket that was definitely not Ji-hoon's style, a framed photograph of the two of them at a recent art exhibition. "I see the rumors are true. If you have something to say it directly." "Very well. I've met your neighbor. Quite friendly, isn't she? Very eager to explain that you've been teaching each other's languages." The way she said friendly made it sound like an insult. "Ji-hoon, I've been patient with your eccentricities, but this has gone too far." "An African woman? What are you thinking? Do you have any idea what this looks like for our family?" The prejudice was so casual, so matter-of-fact, that it took Ji-hoon a moment to process the full weight of his mother's assumptions. When he did, anger flared hot and immediate. "What it looks like is that I'm happy. What it looks like is that I've found someone who sees me as more than the Kang family heir, or the architectural prodigy, or the Ice Prince everyone fears. Her name is Zara, and I don't appreciate you reducing her to her nationality. Don't be naive. You're not just any man choosing any woman. You're Kang Ji-hoon. Your choices reflect on this entire family, on the business, on our reputation. This woman is a distraction, and distractions become liabilities." His mother stood, brushing imaginary lint from her hanbok. "End it, quietly. I'll arrange an introduction to the Park family's daughter. She's educated in Switzerland, understands our world. This nonsense stops now." "No." The single word hung in the air, sharp and final. "Mrs." Kang's eyes widened slightly, unused to direct defiance from her usually compliant eldest son. "What did you say?" "I said no. I'm not ending anything, and I'm certainly not meeting the Park daughter or anyone else you've decided is appropriate. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing something for myself. Not for the family, not for the business, not for reputation. I'm choosing happiness, and if you can't support that, then we have nothing more to discuss." His mother's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake. One you'll regret when you realize that love doesn't pay for the lifestyle you've become accustomed to. That woman will never understand our world, and you'll never be accepted in hers. You're building something impossible." After she left, Jihoon stood in his silent apartment, his hands shaking with residual anger and something deeper, something that felt like grief. He'd always known his family's approval came with conditions, but hearing it spoken so plainly, hearing Zara dismissed so casually, made the reality inescapable. Choosing her meant defying everything he'd been raised to value. The question was whether he had the courage to make that choice permanent. He found Zara on the rooftop garden that evening, tending to the herbs she'd planted in the communal space. She looked up at his approach, and her expression told him she already knew something had happened. "Your mother came to see me too," Zara said quietly, standing and brushing soil from her hands. She was very polite, very proper, very clear about her expectations. What did she say? She explained that sometimes love isn't enough, that practical considerations matter, that I should think carefully about the difficulties of an intercultural relationship before I cause permanent damage to your family relationships. Zara's voice was steady, but Jihoon could hear the hurt underneath. Then she offered me money. Quite a lot of money, actually, to leave quietly. Jihoon felt his anger reignite, but Zara continued before he could speak. "I told her that I'm not for sale, and that I have no intention of leaving unless you ask me to. But Jihoon, I need you to be honest with me. Can you actually do this? Can you choose this? Choose us, knowing what it costs." He crossed to her, taking her hands despite the dirt still clinging to them. "I already have. I chose you the moment I brought you plantains. I chose you every time I let you teach me how to be warm instead of cold. I chose you when I realized that being feared is nothing compared to being known." He pulled her closer, their foreheads touching. "I'm not going to lie and say this will be easy. My family won't accept us quickly, if at all. There will be professional consequences, social complications. But Zara, I've spent my entire life being what everyone else needed me to be. I want to spend the rest of it being the person you see when you look at me." Zara's eyes shimmered with tears, but she was smiling. "And who is that? Someone warm, someone real, someone brave enough to choose love, even when it's inconvenient and complicated and absolutely terrifying." She kissed him then, there on the rooftop under Seoul's light-polluted sky, and Jihoon felt something lock into place in his chest. This was what home felt like. Not a place, not a family legacy, not an architectural achievement. Home was the feeling of Zara's arms around him, the sound of her laugh, the knowledge that someone saw his worst parts and chose to stay anyway. They pulled apart as lights began turning on in surrounding buildings, Seoul's evening routine unfolding around them. But neither moved to leave, standing together in the growing darkness like they were the only two people in the entire city. "So what now?" Zara asked, her hand finding his. "Now we build something impossible," Jihoon replied. "Together." What neither of them realized was that in a penthouse across the city, Jihoon's father was receiving reports about his son's relationship from private investigators, and Mrs. Kang was already planning her next move. Because in the world of Seoul's elite, defiance wasn't tolerated quietly, and love was just another variable to be managed or eliminated. The backlash came faster and more viciously than either of them expected. It started with whispers, then grew to murmurs, then exploded across social media in a frenzy of commentary that ranged from curious to supportive to overtly racist. Someone had photographed them at a restaurant, Jihoon's hand covering Zara's across the table, their expressions soft and unguarded. The image went viral within hours. The comments were brutal, questions about what Jihoon was thinking, implications about Zara's intentions, disgusting assumptions about her character based solely on her nationality and race. There were think pieces about cultural appropriation, hot takes about interracial relationships, and conspiracy theories about why a successful Korean CEO would date an African woman. Zara handled it with more grace than the situation deserved, but Jihoon could see the toll it took. She stopped checking her social media. She declined a podcast interview that wanted to discuss her unique perspective on dating in Korea. She smiled less, laughed quieter, as if making herself smaller might reduce the target on her back. The professional consequences followed swiftly. 2 major clients pulled their contracts, citing vague concerns about company direction and leadership stability. The architectural magazine that had been preparing a feature on Jihoon's innovative urban housing project suddenly postponed indefinitely. And then came the call from his father. Jihoon sat in his office as Chairman Kang delivered the ultimatum with the kind of cold precision that Jihoon recognized because he'd once perfected the same tone himself. End the relationship immediately. Issue a public statement about focusing on career and family responsibilities, and accept an arranged meeting with 3 pre-approved potential matches. Or be removed from the family company, cut off from the Kang resources, and publicly disowned. You have 48 hours to decide, his father concluded. I truly hope you'll make the rational choice, Jihoon. Love is temporary. Legacy is forever. Jihoon ended the call and sat in the silence of his office, staring at the architectural models that represented years of his work, his vision, his identity. Everything he'd built was tied to the Kang name, the Kang resources, the reputation he'd spent decades constructing. Walking away meant starting over with nothing but his talent and Zara's faith in him. He thought about the life his father was offering, comfortable, prestigious, lonely, cold. The Ice Prince could remain frozen forever, successful and respected and utterly empty. Or he could thaw completely, risk everything, choose warmth even if it meant losing everything else. When Zara arrived at his apartment that evening, Jihoon had already packed 2 suitcases. Her confusion turned to alarm as he explained his father's ultimatum and his decision. I'm leaving the company. Tomorrow, I'm announcing my resignation and the launch of an independent firm. It'll be small at first, probably struggle for a while, but it'll be mine. Ours, if you want to be part of it. Jihoon, you can't just throw away everything you've built because of me. The company is your life. No, he corrected gently. The company was my hiding place. You're my life. You're the first thing I've ever chosen that wasn't about strategy or legacy or living up to impossible expectations. And I'm done hiding behind the Kang name. I'd rather be warm with you in a small apartment than cold and alone in all of this. Zara's eyes filled with tears, but she was shaking her head. I got a job offer today. Lagos. It's a great opportunity, director level, leading cultural integration for a Pan-African tech company. I was going to turn it down because of you, because of us. But maybe this is the universe telling us we're forcing something that isn't meant to work. Do you love me? Jihoon asked, the question direct and vulnerable. You know I do. Then the universe can wait. We'll figure it out. Lagos, Seoul, anywhere in between. But we figure it out together. Or we don't figure it out at all. They stood facing each other in his expensive penthouse that suddenly felt like a cage, the city lights of Seoul glittering behind them like broken promises. Finally, Zara crossed the distance between them and took his face in her hands. You're sure? Because once you do this, there's no going back. Your family won't. Forgive easily, if ever. I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything. Then let's build something impossible, Zara echoed his earlier words. Together. The announcement of Jihoon's resignation from Kang Architecture made industry news. The rumors about why were even bigger news. Some portrayed him as impulsive and foolish, throwing away a dynasty for fleeting romance. Others saw it as admirably romantic, choosing love over legacy. Most just watched with curiosity to see whether the Ice Prince could survive outside his kingdom. KJ Design International launched 3 months later in a modest office in Gangnam, nothing like the prestigious headquarters of Kang Architecture. Jihoon was the founder and lead architect. Zara was director of global client relations, her expertise in cultural integration proving invaluable as they targeted international projects that valued innovation over pedigree. The early days were lean, survival rather than success, but they were building something real. The first major client came from Lagos, ironically, a tech billionaire who'd heard about Jihoon's work and didn't care about family drama, only results. The contract was substantial enough to hire a small team, and Jihoon chose carefully, young architects who valued vision over prestige, support staff who wanted to be part of building something new rather than maintaining something established. The office culture was everything Kang Architecture had never been: warm, collaborative, honestly critical rather than fearfully compliant. Zara's influence was everywhere, from the bright colors that decorated the space to the Friday afternoon tradition of sharing food from different cultures. People worked hard because they wanted to, not because they were afraid not to. 6 months in, on a Friday evening as the team was leaving for the weekend, someone knocked on the office door. Jihoon answered to find his younger sister, Kang Min-seo, standing in the hallway with a portfolio under her arm and determination in her eyes. "I'm here to apply for a position," she announced. "I'm a structural engineer, graduated top of my class, currently wasting my talents at father's company because he won't let me work on interesting projects. I heard you might value talent over family politics." Jihoon stared at his sister, who he hadn't spoken to since his resignation. "Min-seo, if you work here, father will. Cut me off too? Probably, but I've watched you these past 6 months, Appa. You look happy, actually happy. And I'm tired of being cold just because it's what's expected." She held out the portfolio. "So, are you hiring or not?" Behind Jihoon, Zara appeared, having overheard the conversation. She smiled at Min-seo with genuine warmth. "We're always looking for talented engineers, though I should warn you, we can't match Kang Architecture's salary yet. I don't need the money. I need to remember why I fell in love with building things in the first place." Min-seo looked between them, her expression softening. "And I need to support my brother, even if I should have done it sooner. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you when father issued his ultimatum." Jihoon pulled his sister into a hug, something the old ice prince would never have done. "You're here now. That's what matters." KJ Design International continued to grow, slowly but steadily. They won awards for a sustainable housing project that blended Korean efficiency with Nigerian natural cooling techniques. They attracted international attention for a cultural center design that created flexible spaces honoring multiple traditions simultaneously. The work was innovative precisely because it came from their blended perspective. Jihoon's technical excellence merged with Zara's cultural intelligence, but the professional success, satisfying as it was, mattered less than the life they'd built. Jihoon's apartment, once sterile and minimalist, now reflected both of them: Nigerian art alongside Korean ceramics, a kitchen that actually got used, a home that felt lived in and loved. 9 months after Jihoon had walked away from his family, his mother appeared at the KJ Design office. She looked older than Jihoon remembered, uncertainty replacing her usual imperious confidence. Zara was the one who found her in the waiting area, and the two women stared at each other for a long moment before Mrs. Kang spoke. "I owe you an apology." "Multiple apologies, actually." Zara remained guarded. "I'm listening. I was wrong. About you, about what my son needed, about what constitutes a good life." Mrs. Kang's hands twisted in her lap, the first uncertain gesture Jihoon had ever seen from her. "I've watched from a distance as Jihoon built this company. I've seen him in interviews. Notice the way he lights up when he talks about his work now. He was never like that at Kang Architecture. Successful, yes. Respected, certainly. But never happy. Happiness isn't quantifiable, Mrs. Kang. It doesn't show up on balance sheets or family trees. No, but its absence does. I've spent the past months looking at my own life, my marriage, the choices I made in the name of propriety and legacy, and I realized I raised my son to be as cold and lonely as I am." Tears gathered in Mrs. Kang's eyes, shocking in their vulnerability. "You gave him permission to be warm, and I'm grateful, even if I'm ashamed it took me this long to say it." Jihoon emerged from his office, drawn by the sound of his mother's voice. The three of them stood in the small waiting area of KJ Design International, a moment suspended between past hurt and potential healing. "Mother, Jihoon, your office is lovely. Small, but lovely. You've built something good here. I had help." He moved to stand beside Zara, their shoulders touching in unconscious unity. Mrs. Kang took a shaky breath. "I won't ask for forgiveness I haven't earned, but I'm asking for a chance to learn, to do better, to be part of your life in whatever capacity you're willing to allow." She turned to Zara. "Both of your lives." Zara looked at Jihoon, a silent question passing between them. He gave a small nod, trusting her judgment. She turned back to Mrs. Kang. "I won't pretend the things you said didn't hurt. They did. But I also understand family and cultural pressure and the difficulty of changing long-held beliefs. So here's what I propose. You come to dinner, at our home. I'll cook, You'll eat, and we'll talk. Really talk. About hard things and uncomfortable truths. And if that goes well, we'll try again. And again. Until maybe, eventually, we figure out how to be family. I'd like that. Very much. Mrs. Kang stood, gathering her composure. Oh, and Zara? I've been watching videos about Nigerian cuisine. I'd very much like to learn to cook jollof rice. If you'd be willing to teach me. The smile that broke across Zara's face was genuine. I think that can be arranged. Though I should warn you, it's a skill that takes patience and practice. I'm learning that most worthwhile things do. After Mrs. Kang left, Ji-hoon pulled Zara into his arms, holding her with the kind of ease that had become second nature over their time together. Think she means it? Zara asked against his chest. I think she's trying. That's more than I expected. He pulled back to look at her. Thank you for being willing to give her a chance. Family is complicated, but you taught me that people can change, that cold hearts can learn to be warm. Seems only fair to extend that same grace to your mother. That evening, as they walked home through Seoul's evening rush, Zara's hand in his, Ji-hoon reflected on how much had changed in less than a year. He'd lost the company he'd spent his career building, walked away from his family's approval, risked everything on an impossible relationship. And somehow, he'd never been richer. Success looked different now, measured in Zara's laughter rather than quarterly profits, in the genuine respect of his small team rather than the fearful compliance of hundreds of employees, in coming home to warmth rather than returning to elegant emptiness. 6 months later, on the rooftop garden where they'd first kissed, Ji-hoon created a scene that blended both their worlds. Korean paper lanterns hung alongside Nigerian Ankara fabric banners. The space was decorated with flowers that grew in both their countries, symbolizing the possibility of thriving in multiple soils. Their friends and colleagues gathered, a truly international crowd that reflected the life they'd built together. Ji-hoon stood before Zara, holding a ring he'd designed himself. It incorporated Korean mother-of-pearl and Nigerian bronze. Traditional techniques from both cultures merged into something entirely new. Zara Okoro, you once told me I was dying slowly, frozen in a life that looked successful but felt empty. You were right. You didn't save me. Exactly. You showed me how to save myself, how to choose warmth even when cold felt safer. His voice caught, emotion overriding his usual control. Home isn't a place. It isn't a country or a family legacy or a prestigious address. Home is you, your laugh in my kitchen, your music in my mornings, your hand in mine as we build something impossible. Marry me. Let's make it permanent. Zara's tears fell freely, joy and love and relief all mixed together. You know what I love most about you, Kang Ji-hoon? You learn to be warm, but you're still absolutely terrible at brevity. Yes, of course, yes. I'll marry you and keep teaching you about joy and remind you to rest and cook in your expensive kitchen. Let's build our impossible thing forever. The rooftop erupted in cheers as Ji-hoon slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her with the kind of unguarded happiness that would have been unthinkable a year ago. In the crowd, Mrs. Kang stood beside Minseo, wiping tears from her own eyes, beginning to understand what she'd almost prevented. Their wedding, 6 months later, was a masterclass in cultural fusion. Zara wore a custom gown that incorporated Nigerian Ankara fabric in vibrant patterns with the elegant silhouette of a Korean hanbok. Ji-hoon wore a traditional hanbok top with trousers in Nigerian aso-oke fabric, both outfits designed by a young Afro-Korean designer they'd commissioned specifically for the event. The ceremony blended traditions from both cultures. Korean pyebaek followed Nigerian traditional blessings. The reception featured bulgogi served alongside jollof rice, both prepared to perfection after months of menu testing. A Korean traditional music ensemble played alongside Nigerian talking drums, the rhythms unexpectedly complementary. But the most memorable moment came during their first dance. Instead of a traditional Western waltz or a Korean court dance, they moved together to an Afrobeats remix of a Korean ballad, their motion somewhere between both traditions and entirely their own. They laughed as they danced, occasionally missing steps but never missing the joy of the moment. And everyone watching understood that what they were witnessing was more than a wedding. It was proof that impossible things become possible when people are brave enough to choose warmth over fear. Later, during the quieter moments after the reception, Jihoon and Zara stood on a balcony overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline. She was leaning against him, his arms wrapped around her, both of them exhausted and perfectly content. "Any regrets?" Zara asked. "Only one," Jihoon replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "What's that? I regret not speaking to you sooner. If I'd had any sense at all, I would have introduced myself properly in that elevator instead of bumping your shoulder like an arrogant fool. We could have had more time." Zara turned in his arms, her smile radiant. "We have time now. We have the rest of our lives. That's more than enough." "The rest of our lives?" Jihoon repeated, testing the words like they were in a language he was still learning. Then he smiled, the expression natural and unguarded, the ice prince fully thawed. "I like the sound of that." Seoul's lights sparkled around them, the city infinite in its possibilities, and Kang Jihoon held his wife close and marveled at how much could change when someone was brave enough to choose warmth. He'd thought being cold made him strong, but it turned out that real strength was in opening yourself to another person, in risking everything for something as impractical and essential as love. And so the Ice Prince and his Nigerian queen built their impossible life together, warm in ways that couldn't be measured, but could be felt in every laugh, every shared meal, every morning that began with joy instead of obligation. They lived warmly ever after, proving that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself thaw completely and trust that warmth is worth the vulnerability it requires.